Well, good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Vero Beach. It has been another disheartening week in the political life of this nation. May you be of good heart here this hour and keep all in perspective, for life in its total sweep remains a good and valuable thing. Please know you are welcome just as you come to us this morning in all of your human particularity and charm. We welcome each and every one of you just as you come to us this morning. We hope you will find our service this morning meaningful and enriching, that you'll find something here to take with you that will make your life better and more decent in the days and weeks ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. Our opening words this morning, responsive reading called Morning Poem by Mary Oliver. Please join with me. Every morning, the world is created.
Under the orange sticks of the sun, the heaped ashes of the night turn into leaves again,
And fasten themselves to the high branches, and the ponds appear like black cloth on which are painted islands of summer lilies.
If it is your nature to be happy, you will swim away along the soft trails for hours, your imagination lighting everywhere.
And if your spirit carries within it the thorn that is heavier than lead, if it's all you can do to keep on trudging,
there is somewhere deep within you a beast shouting that the earth is exactly what it wanted.
Each pond with its blazing lilies is a prayer, heard and answered lavishly every morning.
Whether or not you have ever dared to be happy, whether or not you have ever dared to pray. And as Carole lights our chalice, let us say the words that are printed in your order of service and also found above, hopefully electronically. Each morning, we must hold out the chalice of our lives to give, to receive, to carry back. We light the flaming chalice, symbol of our faith, as we bring joys and sorrows, gifts and needs to the home of our religious community. It is good to be together. And just a word about our pulpit guest this morning. The Reverend Carole Yorke has been in my life since she was a layperson in the second congregation I served during the early 1980s in Plainfield, New Jersey. We are going to that congregation in about a month's time to actually help the congregation to leave its historic building. They've lost the building. They've become such a small congregation over the last 35 years that it's a very sad occasion that we're going to be participating in. But anyway, Carole's been in my life, and she's been our community minister now for a number of years. She lives in Port St. Lucie, and she's an old dear friend, and we are very happy to have her not only as a part of the staff of this congregation, but with us this morning to share her thoughts. Carole.
will you join with me, please, in our second responsive reading of the day? It's called Connections Are Made Slowly by Marge Piercy. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground.
You cannot tell always by looking what is happening.
More than half a tree is spread out in the soil under your feet.
Penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet.
Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree.
Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden.
Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar.
Weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses.
Live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving, tangling and interweaving and taking more in. A thicket and bramble wilderness to the outside, but to us interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and lairs. Live as if you like yourself, and it may happen.
Reach out.
Keep reaching out. Keep bringing in. This is how we are going to live for a long time. Not always. For every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes. More reflective. I have to be careful, though, not to breathe in every word of the news. I used to, as part of my R&R away from the news, watch New York Mets baseball games. I have been a Mets fan for a very long time, but they were so bad this year during the middle of the season that I had to find something else. So I found and discovered American Ninja Warriors. Because I am not, at this point, focused on creating and maintaining a career or becoming somebody, I'm able to watch Ninja Warriors and love every minute of it. We can be naturally open to a spiritual life and to questions of meaning and purpose. Of course, this is not true of everyone. All you got to do is watch the news. You have to have thought about your life for a long while in order to develop a strong spirituality in old age. You have to have aged spiritually. I have been asked more than once to define spirituality. What is it and how can I get it? My answer is this. At the moment that you begin to think about your life, what it means to you that you are alive, and what you're going to do about it, that is the beginning of your conscious spirituality. It's my definition. You may have others. As sort of a comparison, as I begin to see and acknowledge and understand my whiteness and my white privilege, I become woke. You can become woke about your own spiritual life. This has all changed for me many times, as I'm certain it has for you. I will cite only one example from my teen years. I went to the Baptist camp in New Jersey every summer. There were questions put to me at camp one year. What do you believe about God? Jesus, heaven, hell, sin. I was learning to be a counselor in training at that American Baptist camp and conference center. The most wonderful thing about this, and it has to do with American Baptist theology, was the push for me to come up with and talk about my own thoughts and feelings. I remember a pew card in the back in my church growing up as an American Baptist, and one of the questions was, or one of the basic Baptist beliefs was, individual interpretation of the Holy Scripture. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, Southern Baptists. I did not have to parrot anyone's dogma. I did get stuck on sin, but a very fine Baptist minister suggested to me that I might consider sin as being separation from God or separation from the ground of my being. He actually said that. Later, lo and behold, I came upon the Jewish version of that during Yom Kippur. Being separated from God or the ground of being and finding atonement. That's Yom Kippur, all wrapped up into one sentence. I will jump ahead to my 30s. I came home to New Jersey, having spent 4 years in a conservative college environment. We didn't have drinking parties like you-know-who did. But I jumped right in to the women's movement during the early 70s, which forced me to examine all different parts of my life, including my sexuality. I spent years marching, protesting, working up to what was a highlight of my life at the time, the passage of the amendment to the New Jersey Civil Rights Act to include sexual orientation, as in, we will not discriminate because of. I spent a lot of time on this. During this same time, I was re-examining my religion and my religious beliefs. I had returned home to an active participation in that wonderful Baptist church choir, which satisfied me for a few more years. I was beginning to get antsy, however. The theology was beginning to get to me. So I went to see what this Unitarianism was all about. 1975, the first Unitarian Society of Plainfield, to which Scott referred a bit ago. There was no minister that day. There was no choir. I was bored out of my mind. I returned to the Baptist church for a while, but then I finally left and remained out of a church for another 10 years, all the while being immersed in the women's movement, a huge contributor to my spiritual development because of the focus and emphasis on women's roles, women's places in society. So 10 years later, I heard about this charismatic preacher in that same old dusty Unitarian church. Lo and behold, Scott Alexander, whom I have not been able to shake off for all these 33 years. The icing on the cake, though, was the most wonderful choir and director of music. And so I immediately joined, first the choir and then the church. Singing in that choir and listening to this choir make my heart sing. I found myself in that church, in Unitarian Universalism. When I read and began to understand the 7 principles, I cried, especially over the first one, that we covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Oh my God, this means me too. My life changed. I began to experience the true meaning of 2 things, community and salvation. Don't worry about salvation. That's for another sermon. I don't mean the same thing you might think of when you think of salvation. So in my 30s, I immersed myself in congregational life, serving as everything from the sexton for a while. Can you imagine being the sexton under this guy? What I remember most about that particular time, and it was a very short time, there were plates that the pews were held on the floor, and they were screwed into the floor. So I'm crawling around that church on my stomach, making sure that all the screws were tight to hold the pews tight. So I did that. I sang in the choir. I served on all the committees, served as the board chair, and generally made a nuisance of myself. I began to have a teasing thought, an inkling of thinking about what would represent the major change in my life, Unitarian Universalist ministry. I had already gone through a few career changes, from high school English teacher to IBM customer engineer. Remember Selectric typewriters? Most of you are old enough to remember Selectric typewriters, but I'll bet there are some of you who don't know what I'm talking about. Well, I used to repair them for IBM. I was the only woman in New Jersey doing that for IBM in the years between the late 70s and 80-something. So from that to teaching basic skills to recovering drug addicts at Integrity House in beautiful downtown Newark, New Jersey. That was a great job. I really mean that. And now, here I was thinking about taking all of that, all that I had ever learned, to seminary. Good God, who was I, in all my imperfection, to want to become a minister? Thomas More tells this story. In a lovely, quiet section of a large American city, a young architecture student was preparing a Zen garden for a new season after a long winter. As he worked, an old monk sat on a bench across the road watching him. The young man raked up the leaves that had covered the ground and spruced up plantings and bushes. He gathered the leaves into a large tarp and tied it up and pulled it far off to the side. He looked over toward the monk, whom he knew was a well-known teacher of Japanese garden design. The monk stood up. "A very nice garden," the monk said. "Yes," the student responded. "So you approve?" "One thing is missing," the monk said. The student helped the aged monk walk over into the garden. The old man went right up to the tarp, pulled on the rope, and let the leaves pour into the garden and blow in the wind. Then he looked at the newly disheveled space and smiled. "Beautiful," he said. There is a Japanese aesthetic in which imperfection and age and brokenness are considered beautiful. As we go through both the satisfying and the unsettling experiences of our unfolding lives, it helps to keep in mind that simple phrase, the beauty of imperfection. As I took the necessary steps toward becoming a minister, I tried to keep this phrase in mind because there were times when I questioned everything about this decision, my readiness, my preparation for this thing called ministry. I kept hearing this story about saying, "I want to be a minister," to one's trusted mentor. And the answer was always, "Don't do it." Was I ready? to take this huge leap of faith. I entered seminary at the age of 46. I went to Andover Newton Theological School. Guess who taught the UU students a preaching class? I was ordained by my beloved congregation, First Unitarian Society of Plainfield, when I was 50. Guess who preached my ordination sermon? And thereafter I began a completely new life in Florida, a place I'd never wanted to visit for vacation or otherwise. I used to talk to my friends in the Northeast by sending greetings from the swamp. It took a very long time for me to get used to almost everything about Florida. There are still some things. In my 50s and 60s, I was out there as a minister. My first settled ministry was Spirit of Life, UU's, for 7 years. My tenure there was bracketed by the death of my parents in New Jersey. My father in 1999, my mother in 2005, shortly followed by the death of my only sister in 2006. Those deaths all knocked me upside of the head, forced me to reflect and do more and more self-examination. I needed to do that thing that we were taught when we were kids. Stop, look, listen. Listen to what life was telling me. Madame Curie helped. Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Winston Churchill helped too, and continues to help. When you find yourself in hell, keep on walking. I had ended my ministry at Spirit of Life, and I got a job at the Bowley Centers in St. Pete as a vocational counselor. 2 years was enough there. I served Treasure Coast Unitarian Universalist congregation for 2 years, and then North Palm, part-time for 3 years, where I was able to engage in my lifelong ambition of playing the drums in a small jazz band that we had there. I had also become a hospice chaplain, probably one of the most fulfilling of all experiences in ministry, because it really focused ministry for me. Sometimes I think there is more ministry that happens around death than at almost any other time. Now, I love to do guest preaching. I can walk in, do my thing, turn around and walk out, and going home. No meetings, no board politics, no fundraising, etc. I have discovered over and over, however, that a saving grace for me in my life is maintaining a sense of humor. I get that from my father. In my mid-60s, I had a bout with breast cancer. I am now 6 years cancer-free, and it made me stop and do yet another reevaluation of values, priorities, and a general sense of what the devil's going on here. Growing older is associated sometimes with diminishment, disability, and irrelevance. You know, inside every senior, there's an 18-year-old wondering, what the hell happened? I do not feel two of those three: diminishment, irrelevance. Disability. I've had diabetes for 38 years, which has caused neuropathy in my feet and legs. Thank God that's the only place in my body. I so empathize with another New York Mets story, David Wright. He was a long-time Mets player. typifying the best in what a ball player can be, not only his skills on the field, but also in the community and interpersonally with everybody he came in contact with. He hadn't played since 2016 because of spinal stenosis and surgery on his neck and his back and his shoulder. He worked himself nuts trying to come back so that he could contribute to this team. He played last night for the first time since 2015. The emotion in Citi Field was incredible. I was sitting there going, because it was his last game. He talks about finally realizing the message from his body. His body was not going to cooperate any longer so that he could play. If there's one regret that I have about me, it is that I wish I could still play softball, because I was a mean pitcher. But my legs won't cooperate, won't allow me to do the things I would love to still be able to do. Nevertheless, I persist. You know where this is from, this phrase, from Elizabeth Warren a couple years ago, trying to read something into the congressional record, and what's his name? McConnell, trying to prevent her from talking. And later he said, I tried to stop her, but nevertheless she persisted. Well, and that became a rallying cry at the time. So this is sort of my motto too. I will persist, and I will go back to Alaska on a cruise while I still can. Now, if I had thought about it earlier, I could have brought you my whole life in t-shirt slogans. I have said the best thing about being retired is I can wear t-shirts and jeans every single day. When Erik Erikson pioneered the concept that life has 8 stages and proposed that each stage has a specific psychological task that must be accomplished for healthy development, he identified the 8th, that is 8, the 8th stage's task as finding integrity in our life's journey. Here we integrate our life history, weaving together stories, finding threads of connection, and discovering the meaning and purpose of our life in the whole. The work of integrating the pieces of our life story can help us begin one of our most important tasks, the rediscovery and the reclamation of that authentic self. What does that phrase mean? Over the years, each one of us has constructed a persona, a public personality, to ensure approval and safety, and to create a functional and satisfactory life. We became adults with particular strengths that enabled us to succeed. Many aspects of our public personality have served us well, but some may have been injurious. Others may have been highly adaptive and productive at earlier times in our lives, but now no longer suit our needs. The authentic self lives beneath the surface of that persona. And as we grow older, reflecting on accumulated experience may cause us to wonder, is this who I really am now? Is this how I want to be now? We may be completely contented with who we are, with who we understand ourselves to be, and with how we are living our lives. Or we may be hearing the voice of a new perspective, calling from the part of us that remains submerged and unfulfilled. Well, not really a new perspective. My nurse practitioner has said two things to me during this past year. One is, I can't fix you because there's nothing to fix. And then she said at another time, it's all in your hands, meaning my health is in my hands. Not to mention all the pills I take every day, but we won't go there. What I need to pay very close attention to in my life is how much I do or don't exercise, and I'll bet there are many of you sitting there thinking, me too. So enough complaining from me about the hot weather. I need to get up earlier and go out to walk with my walker. What might it mean to us to learn who we are, free of others' projections, schedules, and expectations, to come home to ourselves and ask, who is the me in me? I'm not so sure that I've asked myself this question very directly until now, until my 70th birthday. What do I dare to dream? Who might I be now that I don't have to be who I was? I'm retired, but I'm still a minister. Who will I be if I tried to shed that forever? At 70, where do I go from here? And how do I get there? I need to identify and pursue new spiritual practices. Coming closer to my inner self may be liberating. It's also risky. To speak and act from a new perspective may disrupt my life. We may see that we can no longer live with certain arrangements or relationships, but we need patience to allow ourselves to absorb and adjust to the insights that arise as our sensibilities shift. Perhaps the new stories or interpretations I am making are true, or perhaps not. Perhaps it is in my best interest to act on them. Perhaps not. It helps to have close friends with whom to discuss these discoveries, to help us see and feel what is true. When I was a member at the church in Plainfield, I had a group of women friends who called ourselves Uncommon Women. We met together monthly. I can't tell you how many times they functioned for me as friends and advisors, discussing my next venture or adventure, allowing me to bounce my ideas off them. We questioned each other. Who are you? Where are you going? For what purpose? Why? They are existential questions which, when directed to our core identity, can be threatening, not only because they stir up so many uncertain possible answers, but also because they offer a glimpse into an abyss of yet further and unanswerable questions. This is spiritual work. The realization of the need for this spiritual work may not come to us in the safety of our everyday lives. Something happens, perhaps shattering the illusions of fairness and order that sustain us. Illness, death of a loved one. We face our own mortality and lack of control. We realize our ordinary skills cannot carry us through the next stage. We can't bear to be alone with it. We need help, so to begin to search for meaning amidst tragedy. Or we may be open to the challenge of spiritual work when something wonderful happens and we are overwhelmed with joy or gratitude. We want to bless, to celebrate, to give back, to share. I realize several things right now. First, I am extraordinarily blessed in my life. I have had 4 love relationships over these 48 years. I have a best friend who was here with me today from St. Pete. She's not even looking at me. I am lucky that I am 6 years cancer-free. I am lucky that my body still works, except for my legs. I want to be more aware of gratitude in my daily life. The creatures that help me with that are my 5 dogs. I came across this story once again during Yom Kippur. You may have heard this before. It's about Rabbi Meshulam Zosiah, who lived in the 18th century. He was one of the most beloved, learned, humble, and generous rabbis of his day. The story tells us that when Rabbi Zosiah lay dying on his bed, his students gathered round. They were astonished and dismayed when they found him weeping. They asked their beloved teacher why he was crying. Could it be that he was afraid of meeting God at the entrance to heaven? Was he worried that God would ask him why he had not been a visionary pioneer like Abraham? Rabbi Zosiah answered that he had no such worry, for after all, God had not made him like Abraham. Then perhaps God would criticize him for not being like Moses, the most humble of leaders. Heavens no, the rabbi replied. If God had wanted me to be like Moses, God would have made me like Moses. No, he told them, I am weeping because I fear that the Holy One will ask me why I was not Zosiah. Have I been Carole? Fill in your name. Have you been who you are? May you find that, yes, you are who you are. May it be so. Amen. Go in peace. Speak the truth. Give thanks each day. Respect the earth and her creatures, for they are alive like you. Care for your body. It is a wondrous gift. Live simply. Be of service. Be guided by your faith and not your fear. Go lightly on your path. Walk in a sacred manner. Amen.